The economies, for them to be diversified and to sustain that process, we have to have strong institutions. I would diversify from the norm in terms of talking about institutions. I would rely on institutions because of two functions that are very critical for institutions. One of them is to define the legal framework, or what we call the rules of the game. The legal framework is usually there, but it is well defined when by institutions. And the institutions carry a critical role. That is why when ARC started by talking about creating a class of well-informed policymakers, is because they were going to protect and populate those institutions. Critical because of protecting the legal framework. But the second function, and more important for us, is actually the institutions define the appropriate incentives, or what commonly we call the reward structure. The opposite of reward is punishment. So essentially, when we talk about incentive, appropriate incentives, it means that it has defined a very well defined, or it has come up with a very well defined reward system, which offers incentives and offers penalties when it does not work. Let me finish by saying that those strong institutions and those qualities, that is, strong institutions with legal framework and a combination of the appropriate incentives, would encourage prudent behavior in the marketplace. And that's why we see markets thrive, innovativeness thrives, and growth momentum moves to the next level. That's what I can say for now. If there are specific questions, I can respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ndungu. Sorry. Thank you for this introduction. I would now like to introduce our first panelist, who's just joined us, Dr. Innocent Meche. Thank you very much for being here. So Dr. Meche is the Director of Training for the AERC. And before joining the AERC, Dr. Meche worked with the Human Sciences Research Council as a senior research specialist. He's also the former head of the Department of Economics at the University of Zimbabwe. He has extensive research experience in macroeconomics. And I would like to thank you so much for joining us today, and leave you the floor to introduce to us your training program within AERC. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. The African Economics Research Consortium is a consortium that is networked throughout Africa to try and carry out economic policy research and capacity building for economists and policymakers across the region. The one thing we are concerned about, as Professor Ndungu raised, is to be able to make a difference in the development of African economies. But not only that, we want to make a difference in the empowerment of institutions and individuals across the continent. There are three big words when we think about diversification within transformation that we think about. We think about transformation, diversification itself. We think about the resilience of our economies and our individuals across the region. And we think about empowerment of Africans, either as individuals or as institutions. So as the African Economic Research Consortium, we believe that there is no better beginning than to have a capacitated African, a well-resourced African who can go out there and perform as any other individual globally, compete as any other individual globally. But when we talk about African, as I keep going back, we're not talking about individuals alone, we're talking about institutions, we are talking about nations. So in order to begin building that capacity, we have zeroed in on graduate training as the beginning of empowering ourselves. So the AERC has 3 training programs in economics. Both of them, both the master's level programs use a collaborative framework that is based on an understanding within African universities and other research institutions to come together to strengthen the quality of teaching and training within sub-Saharan Africa. Our programs cover all countries that are in sub-Saharan Africa. But as you realize, they are of different capacities. So we've dealt with that by making sure that we are as inclusive as possible. Our programs have developed to a level that they are being compared, and quite rightly so, with those programs in other parts of the world that are top-notch. So the idea is to produce a top-notch economist, whether they are a practicing economist, or they are in universities, or they are in research institutions or think tanks. The idea is that our African graduate, the alumni from the African Economic Research Consortium, can compete and can compete well against those globally. The third program is the PhD program. Now, the PhD program is again a collaborative program that covers the whole of the region, but unfortunately, the PhD program is is a smaller program than the master's programs, and you can understand why. Because the numbers of students and those who undertake graduate training gets smaller and smaller the higher you rise, because students tend to take different paths. Some of them just want to be an economist and they go and practice. Some of them want to go further and do their PhDs. Our programs are grounded in the realities of Africa. They are grounded in the realities of life as it pertains to our region. So the issues that affect Africa at the present moment, or at any point in time, are the issues that get built into the programs of the AERC. What am I talking about? We all know that the African Development Bank has been grounded in their 10-year program up to this year on a program to advance the resilience of African economies through different means. But in the last 5 years, they've gradually become focused on the high fives. The high fives drive the programs that we as a region try to support through supporting capacity building in areas that can strengthen the abilities of African economies to achieve the high fives. What else is there in these programs? When we think about the challenges of African economies, lack of diversification of the economies, the challenges of climate change, policy, and so on. These are the realities that we use to build the courses that we then use as tuition for our students. But these are done, and this is the key point, at a globally competitive level, so that when an African sits at the table with anybody across the world, he can hold his own. That way, we can hold our economies, we can hold our policies high, and we can be confident to drive our economies to be as competitive as those elsewhere in the world. So I want to stop there, but emphasize that at the present moment, we have had challenges, as all of us know. The global COVID-19 pandemic has ravaged our economies, and as the African Economic Research Consortium, we've stepped up a notch to say, okay, what do we do? We realize that it's difficult to have physical contact at this point in time. So as I speak to you now, we have 3 programs that are running across all of these countries, all networked at one central point at the African Economic Research Consortium. How are we doing that? We are, of course, using technology. So we've got a master's in economics degree program running as we speak in more than 16 African countries right now. We've got the master's in agricultural economics running in more than 17 countries at the moment. And of course, the PhD. Now, we know that in some countries, it's been difficult to run programs of academic institutions, but we have found a way to step up to the challenge and make sure that none of our programs are left behind. So we think that it is important, as we think about economic diversification, to realize that capacity is key. That capacity we should all be grounded in the realities of this continent. I thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mache, for this very interesting and thorough presentation of the work you do on training. And we know how important education is to the development of our continent, and how, to us, I often say when I speak about our continent and how things are done and how people think, we really value education and training. We think it's king. So to know that this is available and offered by you is definitely the right way to tackle all these incredible, difficult times. So I would like to start with a few questions right now. We got a question that is about, this current crisis, and the journalist wants to know what has been your role in helping African economies navigate this crisis?
Okay, so I will first of all let Professor go before me, and I will come up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been. My video has been removed by the organizer, but it's okay. You can hear me appropriately. Yeah. What have we helped African economies in terms of navigating the current crisis? The first thing is that we started by actually narrowing down in terms of what can be done. We started by, first of all, showing that where are we coming from? We have several projects that converge to this. Last year, we had talked about fragility of growth in African economies. That fragile context was not only coming from countries that are in civil conflict, those recovering from civil conflict, but also those countries with less diversified economies, so that they were affected by commodity trade collapse. And so in a sense, it was, how do you revamp yourself and come out of that kind of fragility context? Innocent talked about the training program. We have had a training program that targeted fragile economies so that we bring them to speed to cover or to catch up with others who have been able to compete for ARC training programs. We had to devise programs for such fragile economies. The second aspect of it was actually to show African economies the problem of external indebtedness. Heavy external debt was diminishing the fiscal space. We argued about the fiscal space so strongly that we needed to recover. You can imagine what has happened with the COVID. Countries have found themselves with very little fiscal space. And that has been one of the most devastating consequences of this COVID-19, because the countries did not have their own resources. They had to borrow, they had to get aid. But then the first culprit when the fiscal space is diminished is that most countries in Africa actually devoured their capital, or what you call development budget. My argument has been, and still remains, even when I was in the central banking, I actually advised the president that development budget or capital budget is very, very important because it raises the capacity for future growth of the economies. So when you devour the capital budget, then it means that the capacity for future growth is devoured. Then we went further into the projects that we were already covering. We had already finalized a project on health financing in Africa. And because it was funded by the Swedish government, SIDA, the question they asked us is, what are you now telling African economies about the health financing now with the COVID-19? So we have gone back to that study to actually show that we not only want to talk about health financing in Africa, but we also want to focus more on health infrastructure in Africa and the solutions that we need to actually help economies to cope with the current and future pandemic. For us, is very, very important. And finally, because I know the director of research will come in and talk about more on this, we have now focused on what happens on household poverty, the impact on COVID on household poverty. And we have sampled five countries or so: Kenya, Ethiopia, Ghana, Uganda, and I think Senegal, and I think Cote d'Ivoire. We have looked at what is happening to the household poverty and the impact because of the COVID. We have two aspects here, and some of them are historical, and maybe some journalists will pick it up very well because they have seen the historical case. Some few years ago, everybody started complaining and arguing that governments in Africa need to take care of the rural setting in Africa. Aggregate demand in rural Africa was declining, and so young people were leaving the rural areas to come to the urban areas, and it was creating unemployment of the young in the urban areas. So aggregate demand was declining. Now with the pandemic, with the COVID-19, the close down actually was devastating to aggregate demand, not only in urban areas where most young people have migrated to, but also in the rural areas. So you can see the combination of a catastrophe. And that is why when we look at urban this household poverty, the impact was not only coming from now that we have the pandemic, it was also a historical process that we have failed to reverse. So in a sense, it is a wake-up call. The COVID-19 is actually a wake-up call for African economies to start reversing this. And because you talked about diversification, we need to diversify so that we don't find that people are leaving the rural areas because of declining demand, declining aggregate demand and lack of employment. We need to diversify so that we take care of the rural economy. So we have a whole parade of issues that we can talk about and reforms that we have advised African governments. And there are so many. I think the director of research will even elaborate more in sanctity than I'm doing. I wanted just to list out the areas that we have covered, and we continue to cover. We still have a lot of pipeline studies. We are now even talking about climate change and what is happening to food security. We produced a policy brief on food security and the COVID, because essentially the food security becomes very critical. Thank you. Let me allow others to join in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. Yes, we just have Dr. Shimeles who joined us. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Shimeles is the Director of Research for AERC. So I will give you the floor so you can introduce us your research program. Thank you so much. And then we'll come back to the questions. Journalists, please feel free to keep on sending your questions through the Q&A box. Thank you. Dr. Shimeles, you're muted.
No, I'm not muted unless the host has muted me.
Oh, okay. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, it's really great to be here. Sorry I joined a bit late. So my name is Abebe Shimeles. I'm currently the Director of Research in ARC. So briefly, let me just follow up with Executive Director's introduction. I think I picked up a couple of points. In ARC, we, as you all know, for over 3 decades, we've been working on 2, I could call it pillars of research. One is the research that we call strategic areas that are relevant for Africa in 5 thematic groups. One is generally looks at poverty, income distribution, labor markets. This is a program that more or less was initiated to capture Africa's progress and the deep-sitting factors to understand why Africa seemed to have slow progress in addressing human development, and particularly poverty, inequality, and employment creation. So that group really looks at the many dimensions of economic challenges that policymakers currently are grappling with. The other thematic area we work on is the macroeconomic group, which looks at the host of issues, including economic growth, macroeconomic stability, and also structural change. This is one of probably the most active groups in ARC in the early years of in the 1990s, as most of you remember. Juguna has been, I think, one of the lead persons in that endeavor. Africa was really lost the whole decade, 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and macroeconomic stability was in really spiraling out of control. Many countries were almost in a state of collapse. So ARC really played a major role in understanding and pushing capacity towards stabilizing macroeconomics and also providing an African perspective on economic growth. The third part is finance. As you all know, again, the ED alluded to it, including finance for the poor. This is an area also where we look at financial intermediation in Africa and prospects for economic integration in terms of finance. So it is also an emerging and very important thematic area for ARC. We have also a group that really focuses generally on international trade, with a focus also on intra-Africa regional trade integration. So that group also does undertake research in these areas, I mean, looking at tariff and non-tariff barriers and many other dimensions of impediments for promoting trade in Africa, both export services, but also financial flows. And we have another group that focuses on agriculture and climate change. So I will not, maybe I will come back to them in a Q&A session. As you can see, ARC's research portfolio is comprehensive, very broad, and almost includes every aspect, dimension of economic issues that are relevant for Africa. So within this broader team, what ARC does is sponsor young African, we call them early career researchers, to develop research proposals and mentor them through a series of high quality, technically competent advice for our researchers. Over 4,000 researchers have come through this program in the last 3 decades and a half. So ARC has had track record of building capability on undertaking evidence-based research that are relevant for African governments. So to my mind, there is no country in Africa where you will not locate an ARC alumni that is currently advising African governments. So you can say one of the success of ARC is providing opportunities for economists in Africa to do research in this almost complete areas of research. The other is the collaborative one where we do cutting edge research, frontier research by senior African and non-African economists. And we cover almost every aspect of African economy, the macroeconomic part, the growth part, the poverty part, the health part, the fragility part, the financing part. And I think it's the breadth and scope of ARC's research is unparalleled by any think tank working on Africa. This collaborative research is generally designed also uniquely in a way that links up frontier research with country-level case studies, allowing ARC to have a first-hand translation of economic thinking into a policy research. So we have that organic link between advanced economic methodologies to understand development and also at the ground, very close to the countries where we'll be able to respond to emerging policy challenges. The COVID-19 is a very good example of ARC's engagement with the topical issues. So I will not go into the detail unless questions come from the audience. Thank you very much. I'm sure I can talk until the cows come home. That's what our ED says, because this is a very exciting think tank Africa has, and we are really proud to be associated with it. Thank you.
Thank you. And you should be proud, because I think one key thing that often comes back is the lack of data coming out of Africa. So knowing that you research and you do this extensively on such important matters is really a great tool and a great addition to the development of the continent. So I would like to come back to some questions. So we do have a questions from Julius Baluto, who's the chief editor of the Informer East African newspaper. So Julius, I know you have two questions. I will sort of combine the two. It's more on the political front. So Julius is saying, my key concerns are that some African countries are facing political instability as we speak. And that where it's based in Kenya, it seems to be the country is always on campaigning mode. So his question is, how do we stop this campaign or premature campaigns and focus on development? And then the second question he had is, there are three key aspects of justice: social justice, distributive justice, and administrative justice. What can African governments do in the light of COVID-19 to ensure all citizens of each country find life to be fair or just? Professor, would you like to answer these questions or comment on them?
Okay, thank you very much for this question. And I think I wouldn't want to go into political campaigns and all that. We have looked at, even comparing across countries, what has happened in terms of the reaction to the pandemic. And because it's a global pandemic, my hunch and my starting point is to say that you use all the weapons at hand, because the first line of defense is preservation, life, preserving life. And so it means that at the national level, there should be no dichotomy in terms of public health services and private health services, because all of us can go down with the pandemic. And this is something, because essentially it looked like everybody looked at the government as the provider of the health services. The government itself was able, in terms of providing the rules of the game, that is lockdown, all that, coming up with the social protection programs. In some countries, they came up with a defined social protection programs to salvage those who are in need because of the lockdown. But I was disappointed that I didn't see private sector itself, private hospitals coming in to play a role. And it's because the government would have used the resources it has used actually to help the private sector, the private hospitals come in together to cope. But what we did was to create a dichotomy between private hospitals and public hospitals. Maybe that's one aspect which may be small. But in times of crisis, you come up with all aspects of that. You're right, there is social justice, there is all economic justice and all that. But one of the things we started with is that we started by saying that the economies in Africa started in a very low, on a very low key, at a very weak position. And we have had two occasions to actually even talk about this. The first one was, I talked about, is fragility of growth in Africa, why growth was fragile. The second one we talked about was the heavy external debt, and most of it coming from Eurobond, private sector borrowing, which is not very amenable to restructuring, that is the Paris Club type of product. So it means that it is going to impede very much on the economic activity because debts have to be paid. And the third one we talked about was actually the investment climate and the business environment and competitiveness in Africa. So those are all forces that are combining. It's the same topic being divided into different aspects. And we came to the conclusion that we really needed to step up policy reforms so that we reverse this. Now, economic justice or political justice depends on different institutions, but I'm better, just like my colleague, Dr. Abebe and Innocent have said, we are better talking about economic justice. It is going to be supported by two aspects. One of them is economic policy, and even understanding the economic policy and the outcomes of economic policy. And the other one is going to be supported by capacity in those institutions that deal with economic policy and driving optimal policy formulation and implementation. And the third one is populating those institutions with that capacity, because it provides policy makers, policy leaders, and even thought leaders in those. Our contribution in Africa in the last 32 years, and even currently, is more critical in those three areas of economic justice. By the way, once you get economic justice, others follow much easily. If you don't get economic justice, then others don't work at all, and it becomes an upheaval. So I don't know how we can relate to that, but these guys know how to change the words much better. But let me tell you that I'll be a very peaceful person if I have something to eat and I have perhaps income flow coming to me. That is, I'm gainfully employed. And then I can worry about other things later. But if I don't have that, whether political justice or whether it doesn't work. So essentially, that's why we are emphasizing these three aspects in terms of capacity building and the role of the ERC.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I would like to turn now to Dr. Machi and Dr. Shimeles. We have a question from a journalist in Côte d'Ivoire who's saying, are there specific challenges that Francophone countries face in terms of resilience and economic sustainability? And then the second part of the question is, with every challenge comes an opportunity. What are the opportunities? Dr. Machi, maybe I'll start with you. Or I'll start with Dr. Shimeles.
Please, struggling to unmute.
We can hear you now. We can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, yes, we can.
Ah, fantastic. So, so the specific challenges of Francophone economies from a ARC perspective has always been that this has been a region that for one reason or the other has sort of not been as represented as we would have liked. So this is from the perspective of the ARC. So as represented within the ARC network. However, what has happened over the years is that a lot of effort has been invested in crowding in those institutions and those countries that have not been well represented within the network. So what we are finding out is that the way in which these economies have been integrated within the system that drives some of the issues that we deal with is not as well as from the other regions. What am I talking about? So Professor Ndugu raised an issue to deal with the role we are playing in African economies. And one of the roles we have been trying to really step up on is the issue of gender inclusivity within economic activity and other areas of life in the region. Now, as economists, we are concerned because we realize, I will give you an example. Within the training program, we have a prize that we give to high-performing students that undertake what we call the specialized electives. Now, these students come together and take the same program across the regions. And what we've realized is when you put these students together in such a program, female students perform better than male students. So it tells us something about the sort of potential we are not exploiting if the issue of gender is not tackled to the fullest possible. So gender inclusivity is not only a theme within ARC, it's of major concern for us. So, and we find that in different regions, the participation is different. But what is clear is that across all regions, there is less gender inclusivity in the higher, in the sort of higher levels of capacity. So, what we have also found out is that the challenges to do with the diversification of African economies also affect these economies in a similar way. As we know, the Francophone countries, most of them, are split into their economies depend on, if you like, system, in terms of their sort of monetary union and all that. And what has been happening is that we find that diversification can be affected in different ways between those countries and the countries in other parts of the continent. The last, but not least, is a minor issue to do with the way in which we conduct our training. So when we, and this does not apply to our research part, right? Because for the research part, all our researchers get involved in the same way. But for the training, to date, what we have seen is that the uptake in terms of participation within the program has been lower within these countries than for the Anglophone countries. So that is the perspective I can give from the training side. But for research, particularly on the last point, I must say the opposite is true. So we have, at different points in time, we've had many more Francophone researchers than Anglophone researchers. So the opposite, if you like, in that sense, is true.
Thank you so much. A question for Dr. Chimeles. Economic diversification seems to have become an overflogged issue in Africa. So much cause and deliberation, but little progress in majority of countries on the continent. What's causing the drawback, Dr. Chimeles?
Okay, thank you. Just to get better stability of connections, I'll just mute my video. Maybe a little more on the earlier question, because it's linked also to the issues of diversification that you have one of the colleagues raised. Francophone countries, I mean, if I understand it, the challenge they have, one of the unique features they have is the fixed exchange rate under the CFA arrangement. You know, it has been for a long time, and it's a subject of debate, because one of the important levers governments have to increase diversification is their macroeconomic policies. Of course, sectoral policies and long-term strategies matter, but if you want to incentivize the private sector to be part of this process, it's important the macroeconomic policies provide sufficient incentive to the domestic industry in order to be able to start exporting new products, but also substituting imports in a competitive manner, not in a really state-controlled and highly restricted manner, which we used to have in Africa post-independence. So the underlying, I think, reason of overvalued exchange rates in a place like the Francophone countries, I mean, for that you don't need evidence. For other countries, probably it is contentious, but the CFA, everybody knows, is highly overvalued, which basically means natural resources are the only ones that can compete globally from those countries, and really non-tradables have become an important obstruction of the incentive structure. So tradables will not have a chance to survive. I've been in Abidjan almost 5 years, and I can tell you the price of electricity and water is untouchable. So if you generate electricity, you can profit in Abidjan. But if you use electricity and export something, you will never make it in the market. So this and many other challenges exist for African countries to be able to quickly diversify their economies. But
I'm sorry. Yes, please carry on.
Yeah, there is a positive note also we have not noticed. Many countries have really started the journey towards diversification. Look at the Kenyan economy. You cannot say it's not diversified. Agriculture contributes to GDP close to 20%, maybe 25%. And the modern sector is quite big. Manufacturing and well-organized formal services sector is doing well. The question for Kenya, for instance, is the extent to which it will take the structural transformation in terms of benefiting from the global demand that is out there, so that real industrialization in substantive way takes place. There are many African countries also, like Senegal, which has done quite well in terms of initiating a manufacturing hub. There are many countries also in Africa that have started the agro-processing zones, the industrial zones. So we'll have to wait for this to bear fruit, because diversification cannot start overnight. It's a structural progress, and it's basically dominating market shares or GDP shares.
Thank you so much. Just in the interest of time, I would like to
let me add one small point. Let me add one small point that, and that is what Abebe started by saying. If you look at some of the countries in East Africa that have a flexible exchange rate, the exchange rate itself is a nationwide relative price. Of course, that's a complicated jargon. But the most important thing is that it offers the automatic stabilization in the economy. It is a very, very important automatic stabilizer, because the moment the exchange rate, the current account deficit in the trade starts rising, it is the exchange rate that takes the burden of adjustment. But when countries don't do that, what happens is that it is the non-tradable prices that rise, and obviously introduces uncompetitiveness, uncompetitive, should I say, product market.
Thank you, Professor. Just we'll take one last question, and then unfortunately we'll need to end this session. These are it's two questions, but it's essentially the same coming from Nigeria. Why is economic diversification such a naughty one for many resource-based economy in Africa, like Nigeria, Angola, and others? And the second is, oil-producing countries in Africa have seen a significant drop in foreign earnings despite the call for economic diversification. Do you think that the lack of political will is a major issue affecting the continent? Very quickly, Professor, thank you.
I wanted Abebe to answer that, but let me try it. You know, I told you that we had a big session on competitiveness and business environment and competitiveness in Africa. And one of the presentations that was made by one of the former World Bank chief economists, that is Shanta Devarajan, was that the natural resources is actually one that drives that uncompetitive behavior, and is the one that blocks any form of diversification. And you look at it in countries that have natural resources. One, they are capable or likely to have civil wars, sustained civil wars. Look at Angola, look at such countries, Congo and all that, because of presence of enclave of resources that can actually be used and rooted to actually coordinate a rebellion against the government. And the second aspect of that is because government resources are, or even everybody is driven towards this national resource economic rent. It is beyond the Dutch disease problem that we know about. It focuses very much on destroying the fiscal discipline. I don't know whether, Abebe, you have a major, I think you have done a lot of work in this area. And obviously you can summarize even what most of those papers that talked about competitiveness in Africa, because we need to link it up with why does diversification or even structural transformation has failed, why natural resource economic rent is actually dwindling. That is what you're really talking about. Sorry.
No, I think, Prof, you nailed it. The whole challenge of natural resources, being rich in natural resources, is a temptation for governments not to wait. You see, it is out there, and you have comparative advantage globally because it's a unique resource, tradable, such as oil, for instance, minerals like diamonds and gold. And these are precious commodities that most countries don't have. However, it has also the problem of the Achilles heel, which is you get addicted to it. Aside from preventing your competitiveness, if you look at from the behavior of our governments, I mean, there are very few countries that have been rich in natural resources and managed to use the windfall to develop their economies. Indonesia is one of the countries often mentioned in the literature, and a few also Latin American countries. Otherwise, generally, the whole of Middle East and also African commodity-rich countries struggle with the idea of diversification. Just to give you an example, for African countries, the tax collection by the natural resource-rich countries is pathetic because they have got royalties. So as a share of GDP, royalty revenue is substantial, but the tax from citizens is very low. I mean, take Nigeria. Nigeria's total government revenue as a share of GDP is less than 5%. Can you imagine? This is, but part of the reason is also, if you ask citizens to pay taxes, they also demand accountability. So the natural resource rents generally give politicians a bit of protection from accountability, you know, because the public is not paying anyway to run the government. Therefore, there is this temporary impunity. However, it is important to consider also countries like Botswana that has tried to use the resources from diamonds to build its economy. And it's well governed, and the international community appreciates its rule of law, its democratic institutions. You can't do any better than Botswana, but still Botswana is not able to do it. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Shimel. So I'm sorry, we will have to stop now because we have an interpreter on the line who cannot translate for longer than this time. We thank you so much. We will follow up with you on some of the questions that we have received. Thank you for giving us such an interesting overview of what you're doing. We look forward to speaking to you soon. Friends, journalists, thank you for attending. The recording will be shared with you as soon as we have it. We wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you again. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. If they have any specific direct question, we can always write a nice report for them. They should not feel shy. They should always let us know.
We will share the questions. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.